On my 20th anniversary with the company, I thought I'd receive a card, maybe some warm wishes. But when that cold email appeared on my screen, I realized the company wasn't giving gifts. They were stealing my entire life. And then I discovered the darker truth. I wasn't just a victim. I was fuel for a filthy power game that would destroy everyone it touched. My name is Laura Whitman, and for 20 years, I've been the person who held Eclipse Dynamics together from the inside. At 42, I should have been at the peak of my career, Senior Human Resources Director at one of Granville's most prestigious financial corporations. This city, with its gleaming towers and cutthroat ambition, had been my battlefield and my home since I was fresh out of college. Granville sits like a jewel on the eastern seaboard, a financial hub that rivals Boston and Philadelphia. The morning commute through its bustling streets had become as natural to me as breathing. Every day for 2 decades, I'd walked through the marble lobby of the Eclipse building, past the bronze company logo that caught the morning sun, up to the 14th floor where my corner office overlooked the harbor. I gave everything to this company. While friends were getting married, having children, traveling the world, I was here reviewing contracts until midnight, mediating disputes on weekends, missing birthdays and holidays because the company needs you. Laura. I remember my mother's 60th birthday party, which I attended via video call from a conference room because we were in the middle of a merger. I remember the vacation to Italy I canceled 3 times until my then-husband stopped asking. I remember choosing Eclipse over my marriage when the ultimatums came, but I told myself it was worth it. I was building something. I was essential. I had a purpose larger than myself. The company's success was my success. When we landed major clients, I felt the victory in my bones. When we navigated regulatory challenges, I was the one who ensured our 5,000 employees kept their jobs. I knew every department head by name, remembered their spouses, their children's graduations. I was more than HR. I was the soul of Eclipse Dynamics. The 20th anniversary should have been a milestone. In my naive imagination, I pictured a small ceremony, maybe a plaque, certainly acknowledgement of 2 decades of unwavering loyalty. Other companies threw parties for such occasions. They recognized that in a world where people job-hopped every 2 years, someone staying for 20 was extraordinary. Instead, that Tuesday morning started like any other. The September rain hammered against my office windows as I reviewed the quarterly assessment reports. My assistant had placed a small bouquet of flowers on my desk, her own gesture, not the company's. I was halfway through my second coffee when the email arrived. The subject line was innocuous. Organizational restructuring, confidential. The sender made my blood run cold. Richard Hale, our new CEO, barely 35, with his Harvard MBA and his reputation for aggressive optimization. He'd been in position for only 6 months, brought in by the board to modernize Eclipse Dynamics. I'd worked with him on several initiatives, and while I found his methods cold, I respected his intelligence. I opened the email at 10:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because the clock on my computer seemed to freeze as I read. The words blurred together, then snapped into cruel clarity. Position eliminated, effective immediately. Security will assist with personal items. Confidentiality agreement remains in effect. 20 years, not a warning, not a conversation. Not even the courtesy of a face-to-face meeting, just a digital execution on the anniversary of my first day. I sat there, rain streaming down the windows, flowers mocking me with their cheerfulness, and felt something inside me shatter. Not break, shatter. Like safety glass exploding into 1,000 tiny pieces that could never be put back together the same way. This wasn't just a job loss. This was an erasure. And I was about to learn that in Granville's gleaming towers. Loyalty wasn't just worthless. It was a liability. The email's words kept rearranging themselves in my mind, as if different combinations might somehow change their meaning. I read it 5 times, then 10. My hands weren't shaking. They were perfectly still, frozen on the keyboard like a corpse's fingers. Richard Hale hadn't even signed it personally. It was generated from HR's automated system, my own system, the one I'd helped implement 3 years ago to make terminations more efficient. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. Within minutes, two security guards appeared at my door. Marcus and Tony. I'd hired them both. Marcus's daughter had just started college. I'd written her recommendation letter. Now he couldn't meet my eyes as he explained I had 30 minutes to pack personal items under supervision. "Laura, I'm sorry," he whispered. But I was already moving, already disconnecting from this reality. My body went through the motions while my mind floated somewhere near the ceiling, watching this happen to someone else. The walk to the elevator was a gauntlet of averted gazes. 20 years of relationships evaporated in 20 feet of carpet. Jennifer from accounting suddenly needed to check her phone. David from legal discovered something fascinating in his coffee cup. Even my own team, people I'd mentored, promoted, protected, found urgent reasons to look away. Only Sandra, my assistant of 8 years, had the courage to follow me to the elevator. Tears streamed down her face as she handed me a cardboard box with my personal items she'd already packed, knowing before I did what was coming. "This isn't right," she said. "Everyone knows this isn't right." But knowing and doing something about it were different things in Granville's corporate towers. It wasn't until I reached my car in the parking garage that the first piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My parking spot, the one with my name on it, right next to the executive elevator, had already been painted over. The maintenance request would have been submitted days ago. This wasn't a sudden decision. I sat in my car, engine off, staring at that freshly painted concrete, and made myself think through the numbness. Why me? Why now? My performance reviews were stellar. My department had the lowest turnover rate in the company. We'd just successfully navigated a discrimination lawsuit that could have cost millions. Then a memory surfaced. Last week's board meeting minutes. I wasn't supposed to see them, but Sandra had accidentally included me on the distribution list. There was a line item about legacy liability mitigation. I hadn't thought much of it then. Legacy? That word suddenly felt like ice in my veins. My ex-husband, Daniel Morrison, had been CEO of Eclipse Dynamics until 18 months ago. Our divorce had been finalized just before his ouster, a boardroom coup that Richard Hale had orchestrated with surgical precision. Daniel had fought back, threatened lawsuits, tried to expose certain irregularities in the company's offshore accounts, but then he'd suddenly gone quiet, accepted a generous severance, and disappeared to Switzerland. I'd kept my position through it all, maintaining strict professionalism, never discussing Daniel or his departure. I thought my 2 decades of service, separate from my failed marriage, would protect me. I thought my work stood on its own merit. How pathetically naive. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check your personal email." A friend. With trembling fingers, I opened my Gmail. There was a forwarded message containing an internal memo I was never meant to see. It was from Richard Hale to the board, dated a week ago. The Morrison liability extends beyond the individual. As discussed, comprehensive cleanup is essential for the upcoming acquisition. LW's institutional knowledge poses unacceptable risk. Recommend immediate termination with standard NDA enforcement. Her emotional investment in the company will prevent retaliation. LW. Laura Whitman. I wasn't even worth spelling out. Emotional investment. They were counting on my loyalty, my love for Eclipse, to keep me quiet while they destroyed me. But the last line of the memo made my blood turn to ice. Similar action recommended for all senior staff with pre-2020 tenure. Full list attached. They weren't just erasing me. They were erasing everyone who might remember what Eclipse Dynamics used to be, everyone who might know where the bodies were buried. I drove home in a trance, my phone buzzing with messages I couldn't bear to read. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray, pressing down on Granville like a tombstone. My apartment, the one I'd barely lived in, treating it more like a hotel between long days at the office, felt like a stranger's home. That night, I sat in darkness, holding my Eclipse ID badge, the one they'd forgotten to confiscate. 20 years reduced to a piece of plastic with a smiling photo of someone I no longer recognized. The woman in that photo believed in loyalty, in hard work, in justice. That woman was dead. What remained was something else entirely. Something that understood, finally, that in Granville's gleaming towers, you were either predator or prey. And I was done being prey. The first week after termination, I couldn't leave my apartment. I'd wake at 5:30 a.m., my body still programmed for the commute that no longer existed. I'd make coffee, dress in professional attire, then sit at my kitchen table staring at nothing while the sun crawled across the sky. By noon, I'd change back into pajamas and return to bed, where I'd lie awake replaying 20 years of memories, searching for signs I'd missed. The memories came in waves, each one cutting deeper than the last. The Christmas party where I'd given a speech about Eclipse being a family, the nights I'd spent counseling employees through personal crises, the promotion celebrations, the crisis management sessions, the thousands of hours I'd poured into building something I thought mattered. But it was the smaller memories that hurt most. Teaching Richard Hale the office coffee machine on his first day, defending his aggressive restructuring plans to skeptical board members, I'd helped create the monster that devoured me. By the second week, anger finally broke through the numbness. I started digging through my personal files, the ones I'd copied to my home computer over the years, a violation of company policy I'd never imagined would matter. Financial reports, meeting minutes, email threads I'd been CC'd on. I told myself I was just trying to understand, but somewhere deeper. A different instinct was awakening. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in reverse. Eclipse dynamics hadn't just changed under Richard Hale, it had been rotting from the inside for years. The acquisition of Meridian Holdings in 2019, I found discrepancies in the valuation reports. The offshore subsidiaries in the Cayman Islands, shell companies that existed only on paper. The sudden departure of our CFO in 2021. He'd raised concerns about regulatory compliance just weeks before his early retirement. Then I found the smoking gun in an email chain from 2022, carelessly forwarded to me by a junior executive who'd wanted my advice on personnel matters. The thread discussed something called Project Renaissance, a systematic plan to acquire struggling financial firms, strip their assets, and funnel the proceeds through a maze of offshore accounts. The amounts involved made my head spin. Hundreds of millions, possibly billions. Daniel had discovered this. That's why they'd forced him out. And now they were eliminating anyone who might have institutional knowledge of Eclipse's true operations. I pulled out a legal pad and started mapping connections. Richard Hale hadn't acted alone. Board members, senior executives, external auditors. The conspiracy went deep. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was too broken, too emotionally invested, to fight back. My phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Laura, it's James Carver." James had been senior audit director until 6 months ago. Another early retirement. "I heard what happened," he continued. "We need to talk. Not on the phone. McCarran's Pub, tomorrow, 2 p.m., come alone." The next day, I found James in a corner booth, looking 10 years older than when I'd last seen him. His hands shook as he pushed a flash drive across the table. "There are 12 of us," he said quietly. "All pushed out in the last 18 months. All with knowledge of what Eclipse really is." "Which is?" "A criminal enterprise wearing a corporate suit." His voice was barely above a whisper. "That drive contains everything I managed to save. Financial records, correspondence, recordings of board meetings where they discussed the money laundering operations." "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" James laughed bitterly. "With what proof? They're experts at covering their tracks. Every document has plausible deniability. Every transaction can be explained away. We need more. The others want justice too. But we need someone on the inside, someone who knows the system." He paused. Someone they didn't expect to fight back. I took the drive, its weight feeling heavier than its few grams. They destroyed my life. They destroyed all our lives. But Laura, you know Eclipse better than anyone. You know where the bodies are buried because you helped dig some of the graves, innocently. But still, you have access to people, to information that we don't. That night, I sat in my apartment studying the contents of James's drive. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Eclipse wasn't just laundering money, it was actively destroying smaller companies, manipulating markets, bribing regulators. The recent acquisition Richard had mentioned in his memo, it was to merge with another corrupt firm, creating a financial giant too big for authorities to touch. I thought about the employees still at Eclipse, good people who had no idea they were working for criminals. I thought about the pension funds Eclipse managed, the retirements and futures dependent on a company built on lies. I thought about my 20 years, reduced to nothing. But most of all, I thought about Richard Hale's words. Emotional investment will prevent retaliation. I opened a new notebook and wrote 2 words on the first page: Project Nemesis. If they thought emotional investment made me weak, they were about to learn how wrong they were. Emotion, properly channeled, could be the most dangerous weapon of all. The woman who'd walked into Eclipse Dynamics 20 years ago believed in justice through proper channels. The woman sitting in this dark apartment knew better. Justice would come, but not from any court or regulatory body. It would come from me. The transformation happened gradually, then all at once. One morning, 3 weeks after my termination, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. The polished corporate executive was gone. In her place stood someone harder, sharper, with eyes that had lost their warmth but gained something else. Purpose. I converted my living room into a war room. Financial documents covered one wall, connected by red string like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Employee photos lined another, those still inside Eclipse who might be allies, those who were complicit, those who were victims without knowing it. The coffee table disappeared under laptops, burner phones, and encrypted hard drives. James's network of outcasts became my army. We met in different locations: abandoned warehouses, parking garages, 24-hour diners on the outskirts of Granville. Each person brought pieces of the puzzle. Marcus Reed, former chief technology officer, had backdoor access to Eclipse's servers. Sarah Winters, dismissed general counsel, understood every legal loophole they exploited. Tom Bradley, ex-operations director, knew the offshore account structures. They think we're broken, Sarah said during one late-night meeting. They think we'll slink away, lick our wounds, disappear. Good, I replied. Let them think that. The plan formed like a symphony, each movement building on the last. We couldn't just expose Eclipse. Richard Hale would spin it, bury it, emerge stronger. We needed to make them destroy themselves, publicly, irrevocably. I started with reconnaissance, using my old corporate credit card that IT hadn't deactivated yet. I attended industry conferences where Eclipse executives would be present. I listened to their drunk boasts at hotel bars, recorded their careless admissions on my phone. Richard Hale's arrogance was his weakness. He loved to brag about his cleverness to anyone he deemed beneath him. The rage that fueled me was cold now, calculated. Every slight, every betrayal, every year of my life I'd wasted, it all crystallized into determination. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone Eclipse had crushed. One night, while reviewing security footage Tom had obtained, I saw something that made my blood boil. My old office, my sanctuary for 20 years, had been converted into a game room. Richard Hale was using it for parties, champagne, and laughter in the space where I'd bled for this company. That's when the plan shifted from exposure to annihilation. I reached out to Michael Thornton, a journalist at the Granville Tribune who'd been investigating Eclipse for years without success. We met at a cemetery, his choice. He said it was the only place in the city without cameras. I can give you everything, I told him. Documents, recordings, witness testimony. But not yet. The timing has to be perfect. When? The shareholders' meeting, December 15th. When they announced the merger with Cerberus Financial, Michael's eyes widened. Cerberus was another giant, and their merger would create a monopoly that would control nearly 30% of the East Coast's financial services. That's in 8 weeks, he said. Then we have 8 weeks to load the gun, I replied. When we pull the trigger, I want it to blow their entire world apart. The network grew. Employees still inside Eclipse, terrified but angry, began feeding us information. A junior analyst here, a secretary there. People invisible to executives like Richard Hale but who saw everything, heard everything. They used encrypted apps to send me recordings of board meetings, copies of deleted emails, photographs of documents meant to be shredded. I learned Richard was planning to pin the entire money laundering operation on Daniel, my ex-husband, and by extension, anyone connected to the old regime. We weren't just being eliminated as witnesses, we were being set up as scapegoats. The fury that rushed through me at this revelation was electric, but I channeled it, refined it, weaponized it. Every emotion became fuel for what was coming. Sandra, my former assistant, took the biggest risk, still employed but loyal to me. She installed a program Marcus had written onto Richard's computer during routine maintenance. It would copy every keystroke, every file, every communication directly to our servers. "If they catch me," she started. "They won't," I assured her. "They're too arrogant to look down, to notice the people they consider beneath them. That's their fatal flaw." 4 weeks into Project Nemesis, we had enough evidence to bury Eclipse 10 times over. But evidence wasn't enough. I wanted something more. I wanted them to feel what I felt: the shock of betrayal, the humiliation of public destruction, the despair of watching everything you built turn to ash. Late one night, as I refined the final phase of our plan, my phone buzzed. Another unknown number. "Hello? Laura?" Richard Hale's voice sent ice through my veins. "I hear you've been busy," he continued. "Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" My mind raced, but my voice remained steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course not. But let me be clear. Whatever you think you're doing, stop. You have no idea who you're really fighting. This goes far beyond Eclipse, far beyond Granville. Walk away now, and you might survive this." "Is that a threat?" "It's a kindness. The last one you'll get." The line went dead. I sat in my dark apartment, phone still in my hand, and smiled. He was scared. The predator had finally noticed it was being hunted. Good. The game was no longer about justice or revenge. It was about survival. Theirs or mine. And I'd already lost everything. That made me the most dangerous player on the board. Richard's threat changed everything. We had to accelerate the timeline and modify our approach. If they knew we were coming, we'd lost the element of surprise. But that didn't mean we'd lost the war. I called an emergency meeting in an abandoned textile factory on Granville's south side. The 12 outcasts gathered in the shadows, faces grim as I explained the situation. "We go underground completely," I announced. "No more direct contact. Everything through encrypted channels. Dead drops only." "They'll be watching us," Tom warned. "Let them watch. They'll see exactly what I want them to see." The new plan was surgical in its precision. Instead of a frontal assault, we'd use Richard's own paranoia against him. I began appearing at public events, charity galas, industry mixers, highly visible, completely benign. I smiled, networked, talked about moving on and new opportunities. Meanwhile, my team worked in the shadows, invisible and relentless. Marcus had discovered something crucial in Eclipse's servers. Richard was skimming from the laundered funds, keeping a personal nest egg hidden even from his co-conspirators. The other board members didn't know. This was our knife to twist. Sarah drafted anonymous letters to specific board members, each containing just enough information to spark suspicion about Richard's loyalty. Not enough to prove anything, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. Paranoid people make mistakes, and mistakes were what we needed. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Jennifer Huang. Eclipse's current CFO and Richard's supposed ally reached out through Sandra. She wanted to meet. We chose a hotel room in Newark, 2 hours from Granville. Jennifer arrived looking haggard, her usually perfect composure cracked. "He's setting me up," she said without preamble. "The SEC is sniffing around the Cerberus merger. Richard's creating a paper trail that leads directly to me." Why tell me? Because you're the only person who's ever fought him and survived this long. She pulled out a tablet. I have access to everything. The real books, not the sanitized versions. The communication between Richard and his contacts in the Cayman Islands. The bribes to regulatory officials. But I need immunity. And I need protection. This was it. The inside access we'd been hoping for, but never expected. What do you want? I asked. I want to walk away clean. You get your revenge. I get my freedom. I studied her face. Jennifer had been at Eclipse for 5 years, brought in specifically for her ability to navigate gray areas. But even criminals have survival instincts. Done, I said. But you follow my timeline, my rules. The plan crystallized into something beautiful in its complexity. We'd used Jennifer to feed Richard false information, making him believe the SEC investigation was focused on the wrong divisions. He'd relax, get sloppy. Meanwhile, we'd be documenting his every move, every transfer, every coded communication. I assigned specific roles. Tom would coordinate with former employees at Cerberus who had their own doubts about the merger. Sarah would prepare legal documents that would be filed simultaneously in multiple jurisdictions, making it impossible for Eclipse to suppress. Marcus would ensure that when the dam broke, every major news outlet would receive our data dump simultaneously. But the masterpiece would be the shareholders meeting itself. Jennifer informed us that Richard planned to announce not just the merger, but a complete restructuring that would eliminate the positions of several board members who'd become suspicious. He was consolidating power, preparing to become untouchable. He's planning to show a presentation, Jennifer said during one of our clandestine meetings. Financial projections, merger benefits, the works. It'll be broadcast to all Eclipse offices globally. Can you get me access to the presentation file? I asked. Better. I can get you access to the system that will display it. The weeks leading to December 15th were a blur of preparation. We compiled our evidence into an undeniable narrative. Eclipse Dynamics wasn't just corrupt. It was a criminal enterprise that had defrauded investors, destroyed companies, and laundered billions. Richard Hale wasn't a reformer. He was the architect of its worst excesses. 3 days before the meeting, Richard made his move against us. Tom's house was raided by private security claiming to investigate corporate espionage. Sarah received legal threats. Marcus's bank accounts were frozen. They were trying to cripple us before we could strike. But we'd anticipated this. Everything important was already in place, dispersed across secure servers worldwide. The raid found nothing. The threats were meaningless. The frozen accounts were decoys we'd set up weeks ago. The night before the shareholders' meeting, I stood in my war room one last time. The walls were bare now, all evidence digitized and secured. Tomorrow, Eclipse Dynamics would wake up to a new reality. Richard Hale would learn what it felt like to have everything stripped away in an instant. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel, my ex-husband, watching from Switzerland. I heard what you're planning. Give them hell. I deleted the message and opened my laptop. One by one. I activated the programs we'd installed. The presentation Richard would give tomorrow was no longer his. Every slide had been replaced with evidence of his crimes. Every chart showed the real numbers. Every projection revealed the truth. But he wouldn't know until he was standing in front of 500 shareholders, with cameras rolling and the financial world watching. I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive bottle I'd been saving for my retirement from Eclipse. Tomorrow, that company would cease to exist as anything but a cautionary tale. To justice. I toasted the empty room, served ice cold. The pieces were in position. The trap was set. All that remained was to watch Richard Hale destroy himself with his own arrogance. The hunt was over. Tomorrow. The kill. December 15th arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if nature itself wanted a clear view of the carnage about to unfold. I positioned myself at a coffee shop across from Eclipse Tower. Laptop open to multiple news feeds, burner phone ready. My team was scattered across the city, each monitoring different channels. We were orchestra musicians waiting for the conductor's cue. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:45, Richard Hale entered the building, his usual swagger unmistakable, even from a distance. He had no idea he was walking into his own execution. At 9:55, Michael Thornton texted, "Story ready to publish on your signal." At 9:58, Jennifer sent a single word, "Showtime." Inside the Eclipse Auditorium, 500 of the world's most powerful investors were taking their seats. The meeting was being streamed to Eclipse offices in 12 countries, thousands of employees watching their leader announce what they believed would be a new golden age. At exactly 10 a.m., Richard took the stage. Through Jennifer's hidden camera feed, I watched him survey the room with satisfaction. He began with pleasantries, jokes about market volatility, the usual corporate theater. Then he clicked to his first slide. Instead of financial projections, the screen displayed a bank statement from the Cayman Islands, Richard's personal account, showing deposits of $847 million skimmed from Eclipse operations. The room went silent. Richard clicked frantically, but the next slide was worse. Email exchanges between him and known money launderers, discussing how to clean funds from a human trafficking organization. "Technical difficulties," Richard announced, his voice cracking. "Please bear with us." But the slides kept coming. Security footage of Richard meeting with competitors, selling Eclipse's insider information. Audio recordings of him discussing which board members to frame for the SEC investigation. Documents showing how he'd manipulated stock prices for personal gain. The auditorium erupted. Board members were on their feet, shouting. Shareholders were filming with their phones. Richard stood frozen at the podium, his face cycling through shock, rage, and finally, naked fear. Then came the master stroke. The final slide wasn't evidence. It was a live feed of FBI agents entering Eclipse Tower's lobby. Jennifer had worn a wire for the past 3 weeks. Every conversation with Richard, every admission, every threat, all recorded under federal supervision. The immunity deal she'd wanted? She'd already secured it weeks ago, trading her cooperation for freedom. At 10:79 a.m., Michael Thornton's article went live. Eclipse Dynamics, inside the largest corporate fraud in American history. Within minutes, it was picked up by Reuters, Bloomberg, CNN. The story included everything: the money laundering, the destroyed companies, the offshore accounts, and Richard Hale at the center of it all. Trading was halted on Eclipse stock at 10:23 a.m., but it was too late. The price had already crashed 47%. Cerberus Financial announced they were terminating merger discussions. Credit agencies downgraded Eclipse to junk status. Through the chaos, I orchestrated the final movements. Tom released the full data cache to WikiLeaks. Sarah filed whistleblower complaints in 6 jurisdictions. Marcus ensured every Eclipse employee received an email with the truth about their company, along with resources for reporting additional crimes. By noon, Richard Hale was in FBI custody. By 2 p.m., 17 other executives had been arrested. By market close, Eclipse Dynamics had lost 91% of its value. But we weren't done. At 4 p.m., I initiated the final phase. Using the backdoor access we still had, I triggered a complete system backup to federal servers. Every email, every document, every piece of evidence that Eclipse thought they'd deleted. Years of crimes, perfectly preserved and delivered directly to prosecutors. The beautiful irony? The backup system was one I'd implemented 3 years ago, part of our disaster recovery plan. I'd built the weapon that would destroy them, and they'd paid me to do it. That evening, I sat in my apartment watching the news coverage. Richard Hale being led away in handcuffs, employees streaming out of Eclipse Tower carrying boxes, investors calling for criminal prosecution. The building itself looked different, as if the glass and steel had finally revealed the rot beneath. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting statements, former colleagues seeking explanations, even Hollywood producers interested in the story. I ignored them all. At midnight, I opened a bottle of champagne and raised a glass to the empty room. Then I began deleting everything: the encrypted files, the communication channels, the evidence of our network. We'd agreed on this. Once Eclipse fell, we'd scatter to the wind. Ghosts who delivered justice and vanished. But first, I had one last task. I opened my laptop and transferred $50,000 to Sandra's account, severance pay she deserved but would never receive from Eclipse. Similar amounts went to the security guards, the janitors, the administrative staff who'd lost their jobs in the collapse. It was a fraction of what I'd saved over 20 years, but it was something. Then I drafted one final email to the Eclipse all-staff distribution list. ET had been so overwhelmed they hadn't revoked my access yet. The subject line read, "The truth about your 20-year employee." In it, I detailed everything. How Eclipse had betrayed its workers, how they'd used our loyalty against us, how they'd planned to destroy anyone who might expose them. I named every executive involved, every crime committed, every life destroyed. I ended with this. They thought firing me on my 20th anniversary would silence me. They thought loyalty meant weakness. They were wrong. When you trade your integrity for profit, when you destroy those who built your empire, you sign your own death warrant. Eclipse Dynamics is dead. May it never rise again. I hit send at 12:47 a.m., then closed my laptop for the last time. The war was over. Eclipse Dynamics, the company I'd loved, the company that had betrayed me, was gone. Richard Hale would spend decades in prison. The board members would face their own trials. Thousands of employees would need new jobs. But at least they were free from the corruption. As for me, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not joy, not even relief. Just emptiness where 20 years of my life used to be. But sometimes, emptiness is its own form of victory. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within 48 hours of the shareholders' meeting, Eclipse Dynamics had become the most toxic name in American finance. But I wasn't satisfied with mere corporate destruction. Richard Hale and his conspirators needed to feel the full weight of justice. I maintained my shadows, orchestrating the final blows through encrypted channels. The FBI had built their case, but I ensured they found every hidden asset, every secret account, every escape route Richard might use. An anonymous tip led them to a storage unit in Baltimore containing physical documents Richard thought he'd destroyed. Contracts with human traffickers, bribes to judges, even plans to eliminate problematic board members. On December 18th, Richard's bail hearing became a spectacle. Prosecutors presented evidence of flight risk, 3 fake passports, accounts in non-extradition countries, a private jet fueled and ready in Nova Scotia. Bail was denied. Richard Hale, the man who'd fired me with an automated email, would await trial from a federal detention center. But the true devastation came from within his own circle. His wife, discovering the extent of his crimes and the affairs he'd funded with stolen money, filed for divorce and turned state's evidence. His fellow conspirators, facing life sentences, rushed to make deals, each betraying the others in a desperate bid for leniency. I watched from afar as they cannibalized each other, these predators who'd thought themselves apex hunters. Jennifer Huang's testimony was particularly damaging. She'd recorded everything, including Richard's detailed plans to frame me and the other terminated employees for his crimes. The investigation expanded beyond Eclipse. Cerberus financial executives were arrested. 3 senators who'd received bribes were indicted. A federal judge resigned in disgrace. The corruption was a cancer that had metastasized throughout the financial system, and our exposure had triggered an aggressive treatment. On December 22nd, I received an unexpected visitor. FBI Special Agent Patricia Cole stood at my door, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Whitman," she said, "we need to talk." I let her in, maintaining calm though my pulse raced. Had they discovered our network? Were we now targets? "We know what you did," she said simply. "All of it. The hacking, the coordination, the manipulation of evidence." I said nothing, meeting her gaze steadily. "Technically, you committed multiple federal crimes," she continued. "But practically, you handed us the biggest corporate fraud case in history. You did our job better than we could have." She placed a document on my table. "This is a cooperation agreement. Sign it, testify when called, and you have full immunity. Your network, too. We never had this conversation." After she left, I sat staring at the agreement, immunity, freedom, the government's blessing for our vigilante justice. It felt anticlimactic, yet necessary. December 24th, Christmas Eve. Eclipse Tower stood empty, its windows dark for the first time in its 40-year history. Federal marshals had seized the building, along with every asset Eclipse owned. The liquidation would take years, the lawsuits decades. I drove past one final time, parking in my old spot, the one they'd painted over. Security was gone. The marble lobby that had once gleamed with power now dusty and abandoned. I walked through the unlocked doors, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The elevator still worked. I rode it to the 14th floor, to what had been my office. The game room Richard had installed was trashed, bottles and papers scattered across the floor. I stood at the window where I'd spent countless hours watching Granville's skyline, planning Eclipse's future. On the wall, someone had spray-painted "criminals" in red letters. Below it, in smaller text, Laura Whitman was right. I don't know which employee had written it, but it meant more than any corporate award I'd ever received. My phone buzzed. The network was checking in, our final communication. Tom. New job in Seattle, clean start. Sarah. Teaching law at Georgetown, using Eclipse as a case study. Marcus. Starting my own security firm, ethical clients only. James. Retirement in Costa Rica. Finally. One by one, they signed off. Our purpose fulfilled, our alliance dissolved. We'd probably never speak again. These people who'd helped me destroy a giant, but we'd forever be connected by what we'd accomplished. That night, I burned everything. The documents, the hard drives, even my Eclipse ID badge. I watched 20 years turn to ash and smoke, drifting into the winter sky. The fire was cleansing, final. But I kept one thing. A photo from my first day at Eclipse, young and eager, believing I was building something meaningful. That woman deserved to be remembered, even if she no longer existed. December 31st, New Year's Eve. As Granville celebrated and fireworks exploded over the harbor, I received one final message. It was from Richard Hale, sent through his lawyer. You destroyed everything, but you destroyed yourself too. You'll never be anything more than the woman who brought down Eclipse. That's your legacy. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. He still didn't understand. I didn't want a legacy. I wanted justice. I wanted consequences. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt that morning when they stripped away everything I'd built, mission accomplished, at midnight as 2025 began. I stood on my balcony watching the city celebrate. Somewhere in federal detention, Richard Hale was counting the decades he'd spent in prison. Somewhere, Eclipse employees were starting over. Somewhere, investigators were still uncovering crimes we'd exposed. And here I stood, 42 years old, unemployed, alone, but absolutely free. Free from the lie that loyalty mattered, free from the delusion that corporations cared, free from Eclipse dynamics forever. The company had fired me on my 20th anniversary. In return, I had erased them from existence. The scales were finally balanced. 3 months later, I stood again before Eclipse Tower, but this time for the auction. The building was being sold to pay creditors, victims of Eclipse's fraud, and the thousands of employees whose pensions had evaporated. I wasn't there to bid. I was there to witness the final death of what had once been my life. The auctioneer's voice echoed across the plaza where executives had once strutted with unchecked arrogance. $47 million, going once, going twice. The hammer fell. A healthcare consortium had bought it, planning to convert it into medical offices. How fitting, a place of healing rising from a site of such corruption. Richard Hale's trial had begun the week before. I'd testified for 6 hours, calmly detailing every instance of fraud I'd witnessed, every document I'd seen, every life destroyed by Eclipse's greed. Richard watched me from the defendant's table, his once powerful presence reduced to an orange jumpsuit and shackles. When our eyes met, I felt nothing. He was already a ghost. The prosecutors told me he'd likely get 40 years minimum. He'd be over 70 when he got out, if he lived that long. His fortune was gone, seized by the government. His family had disowned him. His name would forever be synonymous with corporate evil. That was a revenge more complete than anything I could have designed. But the strangest part of these 3 months wasn't the trial or the media attention or the job offers from companies wanting to hire the woman who brought down Eclipse. It was the emptiness. For 20 years, Eclipse had been my identity. For 6 months after, revenge had been my purpose. Now, with both gone, I was nobody. And that, unexpectedly, felt like freedom. I'd started seeing a therapist, something I should have done years ago. "You're grieving," she told me. "Not for Eclipse, but for the person you were, the person who believed in things that weren't real." She was right. I mourned the woman who'd worked 18-hour days believing it mattered, who'd sacrificed marriage, children, friendships for a company that saw her as disposable, who'd confused exploitation with loyalty. One afternoon, while cleaning out old boxes, I found a plaque from my 10th anniversary at Eclipse. In recognition of exceptional dedication, it read. I held it for a long moment, then dropped it in the trash. It made a satisfying thud. Sandra called occasionally. She'd started her own consulting firm with some of the other displaced Eclipse employees. "You could join us," she offered. "Your name carries weight now. People trust you." But I wasn't ready. Maybe I'd never be ready to enter another glass tower, to sit in another conference room, to pretend that corporate mission statements meant anything. Instead, I did something unexpected. I started teaching. A community college in Granville needed someone to teach business ethics. The irony wasn't lost on me. Who better to teach about corporate morality than someone who'd seen its complete absence? My students were young, eager, full of the same ambition I'd once had. I told them about Eclipse, about what happens when profit becomes the only god worth worshipping. Some listened, others thought they'd be different, smarter, able to play the game without losing themselves. I recognized that look. I'd worn it once. The final moment came on a rain-soaked Tuesday in March. I was walking past a newsstand when I saw the headline, "Richard Hale guilty on all counts, sentenced to 45 years. Below was a photo of him being led away, his face a mask of disbelief. He'd really thought he'd win, even at the end. I bought the paper. Not out of satisfaction, but as proof that sometimes, rarely, the powerful face consequences. At home, I placed it in a box with my other Eclipse memories, then sealed it shut. This chapter was over. That evening, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Opening it, I found a single line. "Thank you for showing us it's possible to fight back." It was signed, "The Next Generation of Eclipse Survivors." I realized then that Richard had been wrong in his final message to me. This wasn't just about destroying Eclipse or defining my legacy as the woman who brought down a giant. It was about proving that loyalty should never be blind, that power isn't invincible, and that sometimes, one person who's lost everything can change everything. I opened my laptop and began writing, not reports or corporate strategies, but the story of Eclipse dynamics, the real story. The one about ordinary people who built something extraordinary, only to watch it be corrupted by those who confused wealth with worth. About the price of silence, the cost of complicity, and the power of refusing to be a victim. As I typed, the rain cleared outside, and sunset light flooded my apartment. For the first time in 20 years, I had no meetings tomorrow, no deadlines, no one to answer to but myself. They had fired the CEO's wife on my 20th anniversary, thinking they were erasing a problem. Instead, they had created their own destroyer. The company's next move after firing me? There wasn't one. There never would be again. Eclipse Dynamics was dead. But I was finally, truly, alive. The question that haunted their final days wasn't what the company would do next. It was how they had so catastrophically underestimated the woman they thought they owned. They learned, too late, that when you steal someone's entire life, you better make sure they have something left to lose. I didn't. And that made all the difference. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate betrayal and ultimate justice. I'm curious to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow listeners around the world. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel for more tales of revenge and redemption. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced workplace betrayal? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story matters too.